Don Villar is a labor activist and an Emmy Award-winning former broadcast news journalist and a civil rights attorney. And then I'll introduce Joe Crane. Joe was actually also a connection from Don Villar in that string of discussing with people. He is a longtime member of the labor movement and the union organizer over a couple of decades, but he is now the, I believe, national organizing director for the Doctors Council. And this is an SEIU union. Please correct me if I'm getting anything wrong there, but that specifically focuses on physicians. And what was remarkable there is that a couple of things. Joe is, I think you're the only organizer to have organized private physicians in a strike in the country, and also had moved from your old union because they started really just trying to throw in chiropractors and naturopaths and nurse practitioners, and you wanted to stick with this is physicians that we're representing. Let's start with both of you introducing yourselves, if you don't mind, and giving a little background on your perspectives, and then we'll move to the rest of the panel, discuss some larger topics, and when Dr. Shah joins, we'll discuss unionization, if that works.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Don Villar.
Oh, you want to go first?
Go for it, Don.
And I'm Don Villar, Secretary Treasurer of the Chicago Federation here in Chicago. We are the Chicago Federation of Labor is the umbrella organization for all the unions in the city of Chicago. 300 plus unions, 500,000 union members across the city of Cook County. And we represent the folks who make up the CFL include members of the doctors' councils, from doctors to airline pilots to nurses, to broadcast journalists like myself. I come on broadcast news, and a whole lawyers. And besides the building trades and all of the other union members in the city. So 500,000 union members strong across Chicago and Cook County. We are, and the CFL is called the Central Labor Council. And we're part of the AFL-CIO, 12.5 million union members across the country. And I mean, we pride ourselves here. I'm glad, Mitch, I'm glad you're holding this event. I mean, I know I was looking forward to you guys coming to Chicago, because Chicago is the hometown of the American labor movement. I mean, this is where the labor movement, pretty much labor law was struck here. And I mean, a lot of important moments in history of workers began here in Chicago, from the Haymarket to the Pullman strike. So at the end of the day, it's just workers, people just want to work. People want to be respected. People want to be treated with dignity. I mean, it's the dignity of work and valued, right? And respect. And it goes across the whole spectrum of work, whether, you're sanitation worker, or a journalist, or a doctor, or or a lawyer. Work and how we are treated at work, and it's a common denominator. It's a thread that connects us all. And I'm so pleased to hear, like, when Mitch told me about this and what your mission and what you're trying to achieve, it's very courageous. Because I didn't realize just how the issues that ER doctors were going through. That's sort of like, wow, you sound like a sweatshop, like you said, Mitch. I can't believe that's what's happening. And I mean, when I go see my doctor, it's like, wait, and just like the challenges that are in that world. But that really floored me, and I'm glad I've been sort of tuning in, throughout the whole conference yesterday and today, and hearing some of the discussions, and I mean, really great discussions. And I mean, it's about work, right? We're all just trying to work. Doctors are trying to, fulfill that mission that you guys have, and just trying to do your jobs. And then not having to. There's so many obstacles, so many hurdles, and so many pressures that have been thrown on you. And I'm just like, wow. I mean, I'm sort of shocked by what I'm hearing. But again, thank you for having me, and and let me know. I mean, we're here, as part of the labor movement. We're all just trying to work. We all, at the end of the day, we want to support ourselves, support our families, and do our jobs. And it's sort of like the core of the movement. So, thank you.
Thank you, Don. We're really glad to have you here. And there's been this distinguishment, like, or I think most doctors do think, I just want to work. And that's what has made us so vulnerable to being taken advantage of by big business interests. And there's a number of doctors, if you go back, we talked about direct primary care, hanging a shingle out and working for ourselves. Well, we don't need a union for that. But I think that this has to be part of the discussion. We need this because most of us are not in that situation. So Joe, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get to the rest of the panelists and sort of introduce some of the broad topics that we'll be discussing.
All right, so thank you. I'm Joe Crane. I'm the National Organizing Director for the Doctors Council. The Doctors Council is the largest attending physician union in the country. And I'm not going to say that means a lot because historically physicians haven't unionized in mass. But I can tell you all and everyone on this conference and all your colleagues, how you're being treated. You are no longer special in the eyes of your employers. You are employees now. So this is the time where physicians really need to step up and realize that you're one of the labor movement now. That you're one of the people who are in there. In the ED, you're seeing things that most people can't even understand, and then you're being forced to do things that you don't want to do. Fear of your license, fear of your patients, fear of harming your patients. This is something that needs to happen. It should have happened a while ago. But as Mitch said, I've been doing this for about 4 years. I was working with another union on the West Coast. I've come out here. I moved my family out here. But at that previous time, I had the actual pleasure of taking to the strike line with physicians. And it's a crazy thing to even say that, having the white coats on the picket line saying we're not going to work today. But COVID, as you're all aware, really shone a light on how much you're valued and how you're being treated, and it was enough for the physicians to take to the streets. But we're here to help. I've heard a lot about the way people are being treated, whether or not you have the right to unionize, and you absolutely do, especially if you are an employee. But whether or not you even can voice your opinion without fear of retaliation. I just tell people right now, if that's where you're at, if that's how you're feeling, reach out to me. You can have a conversation with me that's off the books. I'm not going to turn around and definitely not going to turn around and talk to your employer or anything, but reach out, realize that if you don't have a voice, your patients don't have a voice. And that's what this comes down to. Like, if you don't have the ability to say something is wrong and something is right without fear of losing your job, healthcare is more broken than the average public even remotely understands. So until physicians stand up collectively and say enough is enough, well, I'm scared to go to the ED myself. So, but yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. I think this is that inflection point that we have to consider, not just consider. It has to happen. There has to be some form of unionization somewhere. Even if I can hear Dr. McNamara in my head, a little sad about this because that wasn't the way this was supposed to be. We were supposed to have control over our own practices. And I think both can still be a part of this. And I know that I spoke with, along with you, Joe, about, man, it'd be nice if the hospitals just realize that we're serious about unionizing. And then they're like, okay, let's let the doctors start their own democratic group. That'll just be a lot less hassle. And so I don't know exactly what the answer is, and we don't want to use you guys and make you put in a bunch of effort only to use you as a bargaining chip. But I think that different groups throughout the country are going to have those different solutions. And you guys have worked with one group that is close to unionizing under Team Health. And I'm not going to provide more details there because I'm not sure how much of that is confidential. But I do want to, highlight that this is something that we're really going to discuss. So let's bring back to the rest of the panel here. I don't think that Dr. McNamara or Dr. Mulligan really need much more introduction. Oh, good. We got Debbie Fletcher. I know she had an unscheduled appointment with her child, I believe. So Dr. McNamara, one of the founders of Academy of Emergency Medicine, past president, and really, honestly, I'm just going to put this out here. This is my inspiration for this movement, because there has been nobody. There's been nobody speaking out with that much continuity and consistency over 30 years. And me jumping into this, feeling like I jumped into a pot of boiling water. That was the one consistent voice that's been speaking the truth with integrity for for all of this time. So I do want to put a special spotlight there and thank Dr. McNamara. And also, once we introduce the other panelists here, I think have Dr. McNamara frame the beginning of this discussion, which is what is our real approach to take emergency medicine back? Unionization may be a part of that. What's the global aspect? And that'll be my question to the panelists to start with. Where should we focus our efforts on? Is it litigation, state-based litigation for these groups? Is it getting, is it asking the AGs or trying to run a campaign for an AG to take these CPOM laws seriously? Are we going to put forth national CPOM laws? Are there outside of the box thinking that Dr. Mulligan, I'm sure, can speak with about economic countermeasures? And, how much should we be working within our specialty societies, or should we start drawing this much broader coalition? And I know Dr. Dreifuss had mentioned this. I think this is a great opportunity for, I hope that you guys have all learned something, because I definitely have, from a very diverse group of panelists, instead of just looking within our own specialty societies and own specialties, that maybe there's some new ideas that have surfaced. I know change.org from Sailesh Khanda and Joseph Francis about making a difference within the specialty societies is another idea that came up. So Dr. McNamara, Dr. Wozniak, or Robert Wozniak, sorry, too many Bobs. Bob Wozniak is an antitrust attorney, private, but also had a past with the FTC that I forget the exact component of. You can, you're on mute. And then Terry Mulligan, board member of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, past current IFEM, International Federation of Emergency Medicine, vice president. And then Deborah Fletcher has been an amazing advocate and is a counselor at ASEP, and also the head of the workforce committee, and has been incredible in working with this group. And then Dr. Dreifuss, an emergency physician and the founder of HCW Hosted, as well as just been an amazing advisor for this Take Medicine Back movement, which has been a labor of love for everyone here. So let me open that question with to the panelists. Where should we be focusing our efforts? Not that we can't do everything at once. We can have some things in parallel, but where should we really be focusing our efforts to make a difference? And we'll start with Dr. McNamara.
So, I mean, I think there's multiple paths that we can take. There are certain things that are already rolling, right? We, we have an effort to get the ACEP to, finally speak out for, the rank and file doc. Misuse term, this is their last chance. That's going to come to a head here in October. Will it be their last chance? What are we going to see there? Again, the change.org is quite interesting. That could be a way to send a message. So I think it's going to be an interesting council meeting. I have my thoughts lined up for that. I actually get to be speaking counselor there, and I intend to ask the question why. And what we discussed yesterday on antitrust. Why are you just ignoring this issue? And if they truly have buried my 3 resolutions, then, they're going to hear about it from me. And I'm going to, hopefully others will echo my complaints. I think that the union thing, like the big issue for us is independent contractor status, right? That seems to be a barrier. But my belief is, I'm sad it got to this point, but my belief is that if one team health and vision, whatever shop unionizes, it will take off. And the good news of that is obviously, the protections of due process and all that kind of stuff. Maybe somebody could comment, but the one thing on the table that I've not really seen anybody, I've been talking about this for years, anybody saying we can do this for you, is the fee splitting aspect. We are, for the emergency physician viewpoint, you're giving up 20+% of your income for the right to see patients. that is against the Code of Federal Regulations. That's against state law. And, you know, your union dues would be paid 1,000 times over for anybody who could say, we want you to get fair market value. This is the law of the land, and this is the law of the state. So to me, that's like, we need a powerful force, and maybe that's the best argument I see, you know, for unionization, you know, along with the fact of, you know, more protection from getting fired, which of course is, you know, the quality of care issue. So I'm not against unions. Corporate practice of medicine, a federal bill, boy, that's a tough road. But there are states that we can be better at. You know, I personally, with a doc from Texas, have turned in a physician who we know through a ProPublica article lent his name to sham professional associations. He said over 50 in 7 states in his depot. We know from the Brovant case that this Dr. Byrne had 275 to 300. He's the next one we're going to file. I mean, we can get some actions on, you know, if you do something in one state, then we'll roll over to another state. As you're probably aware, the AM board has agreed to file suit against Tenet and Envision in California over taking over a community hospital out there. And again, this is the AAEM physician group taking the action, so we don't have to settle. We can do this as a matter of public policy and run it all the way through the courts. All the other cases that we've been involved with in corporate practice, you know, we won 2 in California, we won in Minnesota. You know, we settled because the doctors wanted to settle. We never got a ruling. If we get a ruling in California that says Envision is illegal in the state of California, that blows the water up, okay, in California, and then it spreads to other states. Well, what about Texas? We have even stronger laws than California does. So, you know, I'm seeing, you know, there's multiple different paths we can take. You know, we've got to follow up on the balls that are already rolling down the hill. But, you know, and then your whole thing about, you know, private equity. I mean, geez, we've heard from our colleagues that it's not just us. You know, we're the original cancer, emergency medicine. But, you know, there's a lot of, you know, Soleil's Conda, the Dr. Money Matters guy, you know, all these folks, they see it exactly as we see it. And I think building some alliance there, you know, and I think the AMA would be behind us. They're not like really tied into private equity in terms of running physician practices. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Dr. McNamara. I think that's a great framing to really put to this panel. And now we have such a diverse panel that I think I'm hoping that this is that place where we can really start creating those alliances, maybe more formally. And I just wanted to also mention, as Dr. Dreifuss also pointed this out to me, he's a ACEP counselor, and I wanted to also point out that so is Dr. McNamara, and Terry Mulligan has also been a longtime ACEP member. So we do have a good representation, I think, from all pieces here. So let me pass the same question to Bob Wozniak.
Hi, Mitch. Thanks. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Yep. Okay.
Yes.
First, minor correction, Mitch. You said I previously worked for the FTC. It was actually the Department of Justice Antitrust Division. And just by way of background, in the weird world of antitrust enforcement, both the Department of Justice and FTC play roles. I think in healthcare, the FTC is more likely to be the interested enforcement agency, unless it's like a blatant price fixing case, in which case it would be the Department of Justice. Also, just a quick note, happy to be on this panel with everyone. Very impressive group of folks yesterday and today. And wanted to point out, Don and Joe, we probably know people in common because I had a background in the labor movement before I became an antitrust lawyer. In fact, right up until I got the offer to go to the antitrust division, my final year of law school, I had planned to be a union side labor lawyer. So I previously worked for the AFL-CIO and SEIU in DC. So just a side note. Mitch, to your question, what can we do? I guess on the litigation front, you're asking, correct?
I really am thinking, where should we focus our efforts? Because litigation, I think, is going to be part of this, but we have so many different possible approaches, and maybe some of these we haven't really thought of, right? Some of this is going to be PR. If the hospitals, and I think Brad might bring us into this angle, right? Like, show the administrators that they don't want to contract out with CMGs, and this is going to harm their reputation. So I'm saying very broadly, but with your background in antitrust, yeah, absolutely. Where from a legal standpoint, overall, do you think that we could make a difference? Is it going to the FTC and the current activist commissioner or chair? That would help. So yes, absolutely frame it, but broadly as well.
Okay, fair enough. Certainly an option. A quick note on Dr. McNamara mentioned, the complication of independent contractor status, and this is probably more up Don and Joe's alley, but I can say that my firm, outside of antitrust law, we do a number of different class actions, and I was involved in one recently that involved a group of Pepperidge Farm delivery drivers who were considered independent contractors by Pepperidge Farm, and they filed a class action based on the Illinois law, which is actually very strong in terms of showing that the employer, you have to meet a test that has certain factors, but if the employer exercises a certain amount of control, you can get around that independent contractor status fairly easily in at least some states. So that's just something to keep in mind. Certainly, seeking involvement of the FTC in some of these matters is I think, a viable option, trying to get their attention, get them involved. We know that they're already looking into some issues like the role of private equity and consolidation and what that means overall for consumers. And I think their focus is on the consumer, but certainly, what's happening to ER docs should be of interest to the FTC because that has a direct impact on consumers. One case that got my attention, and I know that at least some of you are aware of it, is this case that's pending out in Oakland against Team Health that was filed last year by a group of, it's a class action seeking to get a class certified. The class would be uninsured and out-of-network patients who were subject to or victimized by these surprise inflated bills that Team Health sends out. And so the allegations there are actually that Team Health engages in this fraudulent criminal billing enterprise. It's one of the counts is it's a RICO case, which, if you're not familiar with RICO, it was those laws were originally put in place, primarily to attack organized labor. And Rudy Giuliani, for instance, before he became the guy with hair dye running down his face, his claim to fame was prosecuting a number of mafia folks in New York City when he was, I guess the U.S. attorney there. So RICO cases are hard to prove. I don't know where that's going to go. They also have several counts under various state laws, California and New York. But the allegation is that Team Health has created basically this pyramid type enterprise with Team Health Holdings at the top, a couple of operating arms underneath, and then they have the billing arm and then the collections arm. And because these grossly inflated bills go out as a matter of course to uninsured and out-of-network patients, they're making the claim that that's a violation of that it's fraud and that it violates RICO and a number of state laws. So it's a little bit hard to say where that's going to go. The case seems to be in a holding pattern right now. It's Team Health moved to dismiss. The motion to dismiss is fully briefed, and they're now battling over a possible change in venue. So I've been in touch once with one of the lawyers who filed that case. There are a couple of problems with some of the allegations, just from that I think you would be interested in. They make the allegation that, and I think it stems from this article that appeared in the Tampa newspaper sometime last year, that the inflated billing serves to benefit the ER docs themselves. which we know, and I know from my discussions with Mitch and Terry that that's not accurate. I think this newspaper reporter probably got it wrong, and the lawyers relied on that newspaper article. But they do make the claim in there that ER physicians who are employed by Team Health stand to make 3 to 4 times what the average ER doc makes, and I think that's also just wrong. So I pointing that out because you should know that. But also my thought was this goes to fraudulent billing, but I think there's some overlap with the fee splitting issue, right? I mean, these fraudulent bills are going out in the name of the ER physician, right? They're billing for services that were provided by the ER doc. So it seems to me that AAEM has a strong interest, your membership has a strong interest, certainly anyone who's employed by Team Health has a strong interest in it goes to the transparency issue. And there might be an opportunity in that case for AAEM to try to intervene and say that you have an interest in the billing aspect because non-transparent billing by Team Health is a major problem, and it harms you and your members potentially, because especially if people are out there saying, "Oh, you're benefiting from this. You're making 3 to 4 times more than the average ER physician." I mean, if that's just false, you've got an opportunity, I think, possibly to intervene in a case like that, and perhaps seek some kind of injunctive relief that says, Team Health, you have to show your bills in full to any of your ER physicians that you employ. So that's one thought.
I actually spoke with those attorneys, and I got into the whole fee splitting aspect. I said, look, it's not just your patients that are losing here. The emergency docs are losing. This was after they filed the suit. I had a conference call with a couple, never really heard back. I think what I was saying is that, I essentially said to them, a lot of the money should be going to the doctor. It's being fee split, but then they're trying to win the money back for the patients. So I think there was a little conflict of interest there. Oh, well, our clients are now these patients. Now we want to make the doctors' clients as well. I was, trying to get them geared up about that aspect. And I never heard from him, and I assume that's part of why. So, but what you're saying is that, we can say on behalf of the physicians who are being smeared by working for Team Health, we insist on an injunction that says Team Health must show every doctor what's billed and paid in their name.
Well, yeah, it's just an idea that I haven't, I'll just be frank, I haven't thought it out fully, but, and I'd like to, I actually put a call in with one of the lawyers this morning and was hoping to hear back from him before this session, and I have not yet. But the thought would be, it would be a 2-step process. You would have to move to intervene first in the case, and there's, under the federal rules of civil procedure, there's intervention as of right, and then there's permissive intervention. This would be permissive intervention, but the standards are pretty lenient. If you can express an interest in the case, same facts, common set of facts that go to your, the harm that you're alleging. I don't think this would be a damages, intervention for damages. I don't know how that would look, but I was thinking more along the lines of injunctive or equitable relief, which would, the remedy would be Team Health, you have to stop engaging in non-transparent billing. You have to show your doctors what you're billing in their names. So that would, it's a little bit creative. I don't think it's that crazy. I think it's viable and something to think about.
Thanks. What you mentioned there, I think, is hitting on some PR component as well, which is when the initial Cooper study came out, it looked like ER doctors were bad, and that we were being greedy. And I think that's what, there was some damage, and a lot of people blame Cooper for damaging our reputations, whereas it's our specialty society that defended it and really got a stain on all of us. And I think that has gotten out there, and our names are on the bills. So patients do think that we're greedy, and even the nurse practitioners that are supervised by us think that we're the ones making out, like bandits.
Right.
So, and it sounds like that's made it all the way to the lawsuit. So I'm definitely not an attorney, but that seems like what's missing is this whole understanding and discussion that we're on the same side as the patients. So from a higher perspective here, bringing that into like a legal document, and I'm not an attorney, nor am I even as comfortable with the terminologies like CPOM lawsuits as I'd like to be. But this sounds like it is possibly an opportunity to join with, if I understand you guys correctly, to join with a patient class action lawsuit. And by extension, there's one going on in Asheville, North Carolina right now against HCA for a monopoly. Is there a chance to really show legally that we're on the same side as patients? It makes some waves in the news as well.
And I think there is, I'd like, it seems that the lawyers who filed this case in Oakland did get some of these facts wrong, or, they're misunderstanding. And I think they believe, going to Bob McNamara, to your point, and the discussion you had with them, I think they're under the false impression that there is a conflict, because in their view, and I recall this from my first conversation with them, which was several months ago, they feared or suspected that there were doctors that were benefiting somehow from this whole fraudulent billing scheme. They looked at possibly bringing this case, I think, on behalf of doctors at one point, and decided that that was not the way to go, that they wanted to pursue it on behalf of patients. It was just cleaner for them. But I think they've got some of these facts wrong. And if we can have another conversation with them and sort of, educate them a little bit better about the realities of what actually goes on with the padded billing and who benefits from that, there might be an opportunity for us to align with them and intervene. But it would be, we wouldn't necessarily, yes, we'd be aligned with the existing class action to some extent, but we would try to pursue our own claim for injunctive relief to stop Team Health from doing what it's doing in terms of its billing.
Yeah, so if you, when you look at the Cooper situation, Mitch, so Cooper published a piece saying that emergency medicine was abusing, at a network. And there was a letter to the editor of the New England Journal written by Rebecca Parker, president of ASAP, who was a senior vice president for Envision, who said, your data is wrong. Here's some info from a billing company. I contacted Cooper personally, spoke with him. And I said, you got it all wrong, man. It is not the doctors here. This is the corporate groups. And I went with him and we reviewed all new acquisitions of Envision and Team Health over a 5-year period. And he identified those hospitals and he specifically drilled down on them. And his second research paper proved that mostly Envision, but to a degree, Team Health was using this as a strategy. He's now completely on the side of the bedside physician. He believes the companies are the evil force. And, we could maybe convince these California attorneys of the same thing.
Yes.
But that's the point, is that, what you heard over the last 2 days is that the bedside doctor is not allowed to see this information and the patients pay a price.
So it sounds like, and just seeing from the other panelists in here, that this might be something that we really have to pursue. There's a lot of, it seems like there's consensus in this group that this might be worth going down. And before we get way too far down into that rabbit hole, is there a different legal litigation strategy that we should be thinking about, or should we just, I'm happy with going around the whole panelists here and getting thoughts on how this could possibly pan out. Let me pass that around to, I know we haven't heard from Dr. Fletcher. I know you're not an attorney, but what's your thoughts on this as far as you mentioned it seems like a great idea to get in a class action with patients. And I would say this would be like, this would sound like the real doctor-patient unity to me, not the one funded by dark money using our names and the name of patients. So what are your thoughts, Dr. Fletcher?
I agree. And one of the comments Brad had too was that we're not looking for financial damages. So if, then the contract management groups like to keep everyone in their little silos separate from, like, the patients are in one section and the physicians in the other. And that would be a great idea if somehow we could start off joining with a patient class action lawsuit.
To me, it sounds like that would have both real consequences, like legal consequences, but we know that these class actions will take forever, or at least some period of time, right, to work their way out. But there's also a media generation there. And on that note, let me pass it on to Don Villar as somebody who was an Emmy-winning broadcaster and attorney. Is this something that could work? Let me know from that perspective, but also if this is something that could work with unionization in some way.
First of all, I see Dr. McNamara posted a question, about the fee splitting. And I think, here in town, just sort of, there's a lot of employment laws that are generated here in town. In Chicago and the state of Illinois, we've got a lot of great laws where there is the fee shifting. Right, wage theft is a good example, and actually somebody had mentioned the misclassification issue, the 1099 issue. In Illinois, we have a misclassification law which allows for the private right of action. In other words, the prevailing party, they get their attorney's fees covered. So, in that sense, there is a lot of law firms, like there's a People Law Group here in town. And the fee shifting is what pays the legal bills, right? When they prevail in a wage theft or there's so many employment laws that have been passed in Illinois that allow for fee shifting. So misclass, minimum wage laws, overtime, and also a lot of discrimination cases. So there is a possibility for fee shifting, in some of these cases. And I am curious, like in that case, in some of the cases that you're trying to carry, especially challenging a 1099, is there a fee shifting aspect? So maybe there might be. Here in Illinois, like the misclass law allows for fee shifting, I believe. I believe
it does.
Yeah. So thanks, Bob. And there's some other laws that allow for fee shifting, and so those are the opportunities to sort of recover these litigation costs as well, right? Along with I think that's sort of what you're asking. But then you think about Joe comes out of SEIU, the Doctors Council. Think about like the whole fight for 15, right? And how 10 years ago, folks are saying, hey, why should they get $15 an hour? That was 10 years ago. Just the fight, and SEIU and a lot of the SEIU was the one that really pushed that out and changed the narrative. Like people should get paid a living wage, right? And back to what you're saying, there is a communications aspect of that. Like, why is my doctor working in a sweatshop? And it's not right. And just the whole communications aspect of that, the media aspect of that, and think about how we changed the narrative in 2010, or actually before that. Fight for 15 started before 2010, but it went from, folks were saying people were saying, why should they make $15 and I'm only making 10? It's like, no, you should also be making 15, right? And so all of a sudden, all these people who used to be naysayers on the Fight for 15 said, wow, we should all be making a living wage. So as for the doctor's argument and the media aspect of that, why is my doctor, in a sweatshop? Why is my doctor struggling? Why, with all these things? And I want my doctor to really take care of me. And to do that, we need to treat them better, right? And give them a little more power, a little more, say in what they do, right? So, there is that whole media aspect of this. Think about our healthcare. That's the other thing that connects us all, our health, right? One day, we all end up at the doctor's office or the ER or somewhere. And folks in town, it's like, I've been hearing a lot of horror ever since you told me, Mitch, it's like, oh man, I've been in the ER for 8 hours or 9 hours or 12 hours or 13 hours. And it was all jammed up. And it's like, why is it all jammed up? And everything you've been saying, that is, part of the reason, one of the reasons, right?
Don, if you might have a jump in really quick on how unions can actually help. And this is something that I've been working on a lot when I'm talking with physicians, is you're joining a labor movement if you're joining a union. You are joining a much bigger, much more powerful political voice than you can have even physicians alone. So, you know, when you're talking about, you know, what are the issues that physicians are going through? First, I can tell you the general public doesn't even know. Second, I have seen multiple times physicians are carved out of protections, be it from, you know, overtime protection, break exemptions, you know, multiple other things, because physicians don't have that voice. But joining into the AFL-CIO and joining into with SEIU, joining into this labor movement, you are literally going to have the access to the politicians. And I hate the political game of things, but it is a game that we have to play. You know, I've sat down with multiple speakers of the House, sat down for lunch, and they weren't meeting with Joe Crane. They were meeting with Joe Crane, you know, National Organizing Director for the Doctors Council. And or I'm often, you know, talking to the lobbyists and such, and, you know, talking to the politicians, and I'm like, hey, would you like to meet some of our physician members at a union meeting? Man, I've never seen politicians perk up so fast in my life, you know, like, so like, if you guys can tap into this, you know, you already have a structure in place, you have a lobbying structure in place, you have a mobilization structure in place. Unions have the ability to mobilize, and if physicians join in on that, I mean, you're talking about laws, you know, and no offense to the attorneys on here, you know, lawyers are only part of that process. You have to have force behind it. You have to have the people behind it. So bringing physicians into this labor movement, joining in, and, you know, going to those labor council meetings and being like, hey, this is what's happening. That's how you're going to bring about change in some of these things. Tapping into existing structures and then becoming part of that and bringing your white coach to that movement and saying enough is enough. So.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think you had mentioned that when a union creates itself as a union, you don't have to go focus on whatever the union SEIU's political goals are. It's controlled by the physicians, whether you like it or not. And so that means there's a potential for this to really create meaningful change. But if we coordinate between, you know, this movement and labor unions that form, and we coordinate same political goals, that could be pretty scary to people that have something to lose. Brad, Dreifuss was interested in commenting in here, so please jump in, share your thoughts.
I have a bunch of comments that are kind of bigger picture as far as for us strategizing, but specifically addressing this labor union component and working directly with them. I can say from the last 18 months of experience of building HCW hosted, of having SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West, approach us about funding us because we were advocating for the health and safety of our healthcare workforce, that it became very challenging, and especially in the state of Arizona, because there were some ballot initiatives put forth. You're just shaking his head, yes. That were up for general election that essentially were to raise the minimum wage for nurses and all the staff, but it was an unfunded mandate for the hospitals. So the physicians were like, where's it going to come out of? That's coming out of our pocket, because if there's narrow margins, this becomes a very much of a zero-sum game. So when I approached my physician colleagues about, hey, this is an option, we've engaged with SEIU, what are your thoughts? And it was just a resounding hell no. And part of the challenge in that, besides the way some of these ballot initiatives were structured and the history with labor unions and physicians don't thinking they can actually bind together in a union are important to note. But I think even more specifically, the structure of a union with one membership, one vote, and then the hierarchical nature of medicine and physicians, by and large, wanting to make sure that we are running the ship. If we're 1-to-1, we are going to be way outvoted if we're in the same voting pools. And so it almost seems, Joe shaking his head and smiling, it almost seems like a non-starter until we can create either our own union that works in the overlapping areas of a Venn diagram of strategic alliance development between the unions, or we figure out how to restructure votes and weight of where unions are going to put their money, and what those of us in our organizations that take the money are then expected, what lines we're expected to toe. Because I think for a lot of us, especially running independent organizations, and this is I think our group here are very full of independent thinkers, being tied to a huge cumbersome infrastructure that has a lot of priorities that have already been expressed that may not be in total alignment and horizontal or vertical alignment with what we're doing or where we're needing to take this. It becomes a challenge. And so maybe this is the space where we start articulating how we can create the structures and organizations to then capitalize on building alignment instead of trying to function within the current structures and just coming to loggerheads constantly. Because I left that relationship in great shape because I was hoping at some point we could try and figure that out with our political environment of Arizona, because it's different in Arizona as it is to Illinois, as it is to New York, to Tennessee, to Oregon.
Let me just say something on that. And this is why I work for the Doctors Council. You know, when you're talking about unions, you're talking about, you know, SEIU traditionally represents many, many different types of workers. You know, factory workers, service workers, retail workers, you know, doctors, you know, everything. But with the Doctors Council, which is part of SEIU, is literally just a group of physicians. You know, it is the union president is physician. It is an attempt to try to do what the labor movement has done, but to do it with a physician voice. And what I tell physicians all the time, like, and I don't want anyone to ever think I am bad mouthing RNs. My sister is an RN, my sister-in-law is an RN, but like, if doctors joined an RN union, they're going to be outvoted on everything. If doctors joined anything, they're not going to have that say. So in a physician union, your individual collective bargaining agreement is voted in by just your membership. You know, you are the only people who have that say. And I will also guarantee that there's going to be someone who doesn't like what's in the contract, because that's just human nature. But, you know, it has to come down to a democracy. But if physicians don't have the voice in this process, what is already happening in healthcare is RNs are running it on the union side. You know, they have come in, I've sat down representing physicians and literally had the medical director being like, the RNs are upset that you didn't tell them why you were giving this treatment in the ICU. And I was like, I'm like, what? Like, are you literally telling me that the doctor has to explain to the nurse why they're giving this treatment? And then he started to backtrack, but it's just, and again, not bad mouthing nurses, but physicians need to understand that this isn't the Teamsters. This isn't, you know, a factory workers union. This isn't a coal miners union, which we will stand together with, but this is a physician's voice. And the other thing that physicians really need to understand is the vast majority of union members in this country now have 4-year degrees. Like the workforce in America is changing. You are the new sweatshops. You're well compensated sweatshops, but if you don't realize where you're standing and don't realize that, you know, the only way you're going to have a seat at the table is by kicking in the door and saying, we're going to sit here and we're going to discuss this, then there's going to be a lot of problems. But yeah, Arizona, Texas, Alabama, there's some places, I'll call you back if you reach back to me, but I probably won't be going out to that place first. So no offense to anyone out there.
But I think it's also important to note, and this is a perfect juncture, us walking with humility as physicians. We have a horrible reputation because there are some very loud folks that really give the rest of us a bad name, when most of us are actually looking to build towards solutions with our colleagues. I don't mind talking with nurses, educating them as far as what I'm doing and my thought process, because that's better for the patients as well if everyone understands why we're doing what we're doing. But when we come on one end of the spectrum of intensity because we think we're having to counteract that counter pressure on the other end of the spectrum, it just completely leads to loggerheads, when really our goals should be about patient safety and meaningful access to affordable quality of care for our entire population. And if we stick to those components, I think we will get a whole hell of a lot farther with both sets of stakeholders.
I think that's definitely going to help with the messaging as well, and that's going to be a big part of taking this back and taking medicine back. And I saw in the comments here, Jared mentioned partnering with other healers. You know, and we haven't discussed healers. That's a much broader word, and it certainly isn't providers. And I like the word healer better than a provider in general. But I assume that also means, you know, it's a very broad encompassing term, and I actually don't hate it, because we're really talking about people being on the same side. And so that when we open this up into a discussion about how we take medicine back in a much broader sense, while still being true to ourselves and being transparent about training, because there's a difference then between, you know, the acupuncturist I know that completely stays in the acupuncture lane but considers himself a healer, and I think that's totally fair, because a therapist is a healer as well, right? Nobody's saying that they're stepping out of their lane unless they're trying to prescribe or something, right? I just wanted to throw that out there. And then also note that there are a ton of intelligent and qualified people in the audience here, and we will definitely open this up for further discussion and have people be able to speak up, because this is also supposed to be a little bit town hall like, and we can only fit so many people on the Zoom screen as spotlighted. But before we do that, I wanted to get back to the litigation component here. Did anyone else have any other thoughts as far as, are there any other approaches that we should take, or what do you guys see as the next steps for making this actually happen? Because there's lawsuits going on right now, the Asheville HCA one, there's the one that Bob Wozniak mentioned, and then there's this fee splitting. What next, like concrete next steps, is what this title of this panel is. What concrete next steps should there be? And looks like Dr. Moreno couldn't join our panel, but she mentioned lawyers taking up the cause for free. And I know we all have to eat, but you know, is there that some big movement that we can actually jump onto as a group, and maybe work with? My train of thought there was also about AEM's foundation, right? We would love somebody to take it up for free, but there is money in some pools. What can we do as a group as a next step? And I'll send that to Dr. McNamara.
So Mitch, I mean, I think, you know, the case against HCA, we should definitely look at that for the same thing that Bob Wozniak was talking about with this team health class action. And if we can do this permissive intervention there, you know, that's tighter, it's a little quicker, it's already in progress. It sounds like that's something that's probably going to roll faster than the class action. It was mentioned yesterday, before we get off the litigation part, that I don't know if they said it was the FTC or the HHS, but somebody said we should contact them because people that are billing CMS are supposed to follow state law, and they're not following state law based upon the corporate practice of medicine doctrine. So I don't know where exactly that came up. I kind of caught it in passing, but is that the truth? Like, so in Texas, where you have these sham professional associations, their team health and division are billing CMS for Medicare patients, but they're violating state law. I thought somebody said in that conversation there was an angle of attack there that we've never attacked. Anybody recall that? All right, maybe
I don't recall that specifically coming up in the panel I was on, but it's certainly, I mean, look, the FTC takes complaints all the time, and they're more likely to take a serious complaint. I think there's a portal right on the FTC website where you can lodge a complaint. So
maybe, yeah, put that on the parking lot of things to look into. I believe it was somebody who knew it came in the context of there's a new FTC in town. They're very busy right now, but you guys ought to look at this. That may have been the woman who was talking about all that kind of stuff. So
it might have been Mo. Was it
Mo? Yeah, Mo.
Yeah, she might have mentioned that, and that's, you know, Lena Khan is definitely a more activist chief of the FTC than we've seen in a number of years. So certainly a good thought. I did have a few questions about, you know, another concern that's been raised is the due process issue, and I know there's been, you know, we haven't talked about that a lot in terms of litigation. There's been a number of these cases where ER docs have been wrongly terminated, and a few of them I looked into. I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Raymond Bronvant MCare case where he got something like $26 million awarded, and that was MCare. There's one going on right now out in Washington State. I can't remember if it's Tacoma or Seattle. Ming Lin, who was dismissed by Team Health Well, Peace Health, I guess it's Peace Health who operates the hospital, and Team Health employs the physicians there. That case is pending, and the ACLU actually took that up for it. So that's just, I'm throwing that out there because you asked, like, who might be an ally, who might be willing to take on, some litigation for free. I mean, the ACLU possibly in those kind of employment disputes, something to think about. But a thought that I had, and I don't know if this has been attempted in any of these individual employment cases, is to, as part of the settlement, or perhaps put a claim in the case, seeking some kind of injunctive relief from the defendant, whether it's MCare or Team Health, that goes to the due process issue. Get them to agree that they will not, going forward, violate the due process rights of any doctor who they wish to terminate.
Minglin and I have been in conversation since the beginning of this case. I actually drafted the AAM position statement that was up about, these companies shouldn't be allowed to employ in the state of Washington. And, we thought we had a little connection there with the governor, pointing out the corporate practice of medicine issues with Team Health. That never panned out. But he asked me, well, they're going to offer me a settlement. What is it that I should shoot for, the pie in the sky? And I said, you can ask them to remove from their contracts all this, third-party termination. And, his response was, well, they're probably never going to do that. But we can go back and ask him again, because he's already been talked to about that. And he was on the panels earlier. So Ming was he spoke here.
Okay, I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah. And there's numerous other cases going on. I mean, yeah. I'm like an unpaid expert for like 8 different ED docs that are going through employment issues. I gave a 6-hour deposition a couple days ago when a doc who was terminated because the hospital president didn't like him and he threatened the group, if you don't get rid of Dr. X, we're going to end your contract. We're going to use our 90-day notice. So the group, he resigned, and now he's pushing back because he had argued with the president of the hospital over quality of care a couple times, and it's happening all over. So I'll reach out to Ming. I'll see where he's at with that.
Okay, and I do think you can always aim for it in settlement, but if you don't have a claim that goes directly toward that issue, it's going to be a little bit tougher. I think it's a much more viable option if you include in the employment, the wrongful termination lawsuit, a claim for injunctive relief on behalf of all ER docs who are employed by that defendant, and then push to settle that as well as the individual, damages claim.
That's something going through my head now. Just to transition, I'll introduce Dr. Shah in a moment here. But one thing in the back of my mind here, as we're talking about this class action lawsuit, is what's the end result? What's the purpose? Do we get due process out of it? Do we just get a splash in the media that we're suing Team Health? Because we look at, or whatever it is, we look at HCA. I just saw this posted. They paid like $1.5 trillion, I think it's a billion, something like that, in fines because they consider it a line item expense. So that they still exist. So, in any lawsuit, I would want to have the end result in mind. What are we doing with it? Maybe most of the benefit is PR, and we then use that to get the hospitals to say, "Wow, this is not worth our reputation to continue with these exploitative CMGs that are getting a bad rap." I'm not really sure, but I know that Dr. Shah had used this terminology just in discussing with me. Right? We want to make real differences. Just like make real differences actually happening. I think due process is one component of that. Making real changes in the structure or breaking these groups up from the FTC component is a real change. And if we can then recreate stable, transparent, democratic groups, and Dr. Lawhorn, I will jump in a little bit later in here to give his thoughts about how the AAM physician group, as a former board member, could potentially do that. There's different approaches. And I wanted to bring in Dr. Shah to the discussion. So for those who don't know, is an Arizona state representative and an emergency physician who has been working on, I'll let you describe it in much more depth, but has been working on some due process legislation, and also has been organizing some ideas on collective bargaining, which unfortunately we weren't able to have a full conversation yet, but Don Villar, you were, and Joe Crane were tied into that conversation as a possibility. So Dr. Shah, if you can give us some perspectives.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. I had a prior meeting and an engagement that I could not get out of. So Mitch and I had talked about that, but glad to join you all. I didn't hear the context of the conversation, but I'll just tell you a little bit about what it is that we've been doing specifically at the Arizona House of Representatives and through my work as a legislator to try to help all this. This situation. I want to mention that when I first got elected, I mean, the priorities include all kinds of things that are outside of healthcare too. But I wanted to take up healthcare specifically. I'm currently one of 2 physicians in the Arizona House of Representatives. The other is leaving, from what I understand. So I might be the only one next year, and I've coordinated with the State Medical Society, which is the Arizona Medical Association, pretty frequently. I mean, we're almost on a weekly call and have been for years now. And I'm also on the board of the Arizona College of Emergency Physicians with Brad Dreifuss. So we've been examining and trying to address as many of these issues as possible. Part of my focus is, as I mentioned in the opening remarks yesterday on this conference, is happy lives. Good outcomes for physicians and passing a lot of our best principles on to the next generation so that our profession is protected going forward for all that come after us. I think that's part of our responsibility. So under that umbrella, we've been very lucky. I got a bill passed. I'm a Democrat, and last year I was a freshman. And to get it through an all Republican legislature was not and the governor is not a small thing, but we did manage to get past a non-retaliation bill 2622. It passed with solid bipartisan support. And the way you do it as a legislator is also as important as what you write in there. Inviting everybody to the table, working in good faith, and treating everybody with respect. It still can work in the political process, but what we did was basically tighten up the language so that third parties could not retaliate. Arizona had a retaliation statute on the books, but what you could do is, as a third party, i.e. a contract management group, just like the story I just heard, I think from Dr. McNamara, that third party could just come in and then do the dirty work. And so we wanted to specifically stop that. And I did it based on an ER doc who happens to be a really good friend of mine, who had worked at a hospital and had a personal experience like that. So I actually took him, and he didn't want to necessarily testify in public. So I took him behind the scenes to meet the Speaker of the House of Representatives and others who are important in the process so that they could hear his story personally, and then he not have to suffer the consequences of being out in public. And that's kind of how we got that bill passed. I think that could be moved all across the country. So that's just one little thing that we were able to address. I think that from the more national perspective, when working with AAEM and with ASAP, trying to get them, their leadership, their board of directors, to put a lot more of our bills into the Congress and introduce those and push them there. Congressman Raul Ruiz, who is an emergency physician who is from Palm Springs area, worked with us on this. He was at the AAEM lobby day. And we were pushing a due process bill. It was also bipartisan, which is great. And we've talked about this very same issue coming up at ASAP as well. And we're pushing them to continue to support this legislation when they have meetings. They have, both of these groups have lobbyists, and those lobbyists, what they do for us is introduce those bills and get them pushed forward. It's important to understand how that all works so that we can continue to support those people when they're helping us. It doesn't work without all of you here and all of the people who are behind this, because it has to be a group effort. People, the legislators will trust me, I am one. I will want to see that there is a group, or there is a solid cohort that is trying to push these things forward. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about what Mitch just mentioned with regard to organizing. We had actually brought up this idea of unions, of some kind of, or collective bargaining. And to that extent, I had an initial conversation with a gentleman who happens to be an employment lawyer and specializes in exactly this kind of stuff for the state of Arizona. There's a lot of legal research that goes in behind the scenes before you can start doing something like that. And you have to be really careful. It's tricky. I am not a lawyer. I am certainly not an employment lawyer. And fortunately, these folks are willing to do a lot of that research for us. When I told them about what it is that we were specifically looking for, what our market situation is, what's going on in the world of emergency medicine, the kinds of issues we're talking about right now. And so those discussions are very preliminary, and they've assured us that they will get back to us within the next, he said, I'm very, very interested in this, and I will get back to you. It'll be a few weeks as our legal team completes all its research. So that's kind of where we are in the initial stages of looking at that and how it goes. So it's just, we'll see. I think that unions themselves are one option. The thing, though, about unions is that you have to be an employee to be a union. And a lot of ER doctors are independent contractors, and they like it that way. So is it an option? Yeah, but we have to think carefully about what that actually means. There are other loose associations, or I shouldn't say, not quite employees, but there's like other things like SAG-AFTRA, for the actors, the Screen Actors Guild, that do these things where these folks are kind of acting as contractors, and then when they interface, they end up getting a negotiated rate, a contracted rate. I know this because way back when in New York, I went on auditions and almost joined SAG-AFTRA. So oddly enough, but that's kind of the update on the progress and what's going on. So we're continuing to work on it. I wish I had more concrete things to report, but I'm hoping to get together with Dr. Villar and Dr. Crane, and hopefully we'll have some fruitful discussions from that.
I don't even know how to pronounce Esquire. Is that what it is? ESQ?
Yeah, there you go, Esquire.
I don't know if it's a doctorate of law, or maybe it's not technically the doctorate, but anyway, so Joe is a national organizer.
Not a doctor.
A doctor organizer.
Just gave you the degree.
Honorary. Yeah, thanks for joining, Dr. Shah. And a couple of those things were discussed slightly, like the independent contractor status. We discussed a little bit of that earlier. So what I wanted to actually do, we've got about an hour left, which is great. We kind of wanted this to be that way because we have a very broad scope of discussions. Maybe it's too broad, I'm not sure, but I think we're making some real good progress. And I wanted to note that, Dr. McNamara's op-eds and part of his discussion here is that it's lack of transparency and lack of due process are the linchpins of corporate abuse. So I think we're on the right track here when we're talking about illegal fee splitting as a legal component, and due process, whether that's going to be something we attain by law, or excuse me, by unions or by other legal means. So I think we're on that right path. And just to frame the rest of this talk here, what I want to do right now is probably ask Dr. Fletcher to reflect on her comment just a moment, because I think that's a good question and discussion. And then we can talk about unionization, collective bargaining, now that we have sort of the full complement of people who are thinking about that. And then we'll have Dr. Mulligan give a little bit of a zoom out global perspective and probably bring up some things that we haven't really thought about or talked about here. So I think we've got plenty of time to do that. So I don't want people to feel rushed. And then we'll have probably at least another 20 minutes or so, because I also want to get Dr. Lawhorn to discuss his thoughts on retaking contracts for transparent democratic groups. So Dr. Fletcher.
Did you mean the comment about the anti-retaliation?
Yes, because I think that piggybacks on what Dr. Shah was talking about, and you brought up some good perspectives on it.
Exactly. And like for Louisiana, we're trying to figure out what bills we want to put forth for this next legislative session. And the PPP attorney was able to talk to a small group of us to kind of give some ideas. And he did bring up the anti-retaliation, because most of our focus, on PPP was more towards the non-physician practitioners. And he said, there are conscience clauses in most of the laws, or many of them, that let a physician opt out if it's something that they disagree with. And it's similar to the OBs refusing to do abortions. And I guess right now, though, in this political climate, other people have recommended not even to go there with that one. But there are other things we could bring up as far as conscience issues that we think that it's important to speak out, similar to what Dr. Lynn did, and to not be retaliated against. And one of the things he said is easy for emergency physicians to prove is if you were retaliated against, because you can prove that you were on the schedule and then you weren't. Or, they could technically say, oh, we didn't fire you, we're just not using you. But you can prove you had so many shifts pre the incident and then few to none afterwards. So that is something that's provable.
Yeah, the anti-retaliation laws are something that I hadn't really crossed my mind. You bring up a good point. You don't want to be stepping in the muddy water of Texas and abortion and stuff like that. But if it can be done without that political component, then I think that's something to consider. So let's go ahead, and if I would kind of want to open it up to Dr. Shah to introduce his concept or whatever you want to share about that. Because again, the SAG-AFTRA, right? A little bit, if people are not familiar with that, probably Don is quite familiar with it as a labor attorney and being in the media, but this is a little bit different than a simple union, but rather a labor pool and almost like a guild. And I don't know what I'm talking about when I say guild, but that's why we have people smarter than me to jump in here. So Dr. Shah.
I think one of the concepts that we had been talking about is this idea of everybody joining a group that then would go and contract with all of the other groups that are out there, including all the contract management groups. That's one concept. That's almost more of a business solution. It's almost like everybody joining one large practice organization, and then that practice organization will go out and contract with the others. That is the reason I bring that up, is because it's viable. It's a real solution to the problem. Because if you have an organization, well-organized groups always will do better than the unorganized. That's true in politics, that's true in business, that's basically true everywhere. So the answer to them being organized and being in a kind of heading toward and I don't know the specifics, I haven't done all the market research, but it's like kind of an oligopoly situation, right? The people buying up practices, and we might have a situation similar to like airlines, where you have four major airlines in America control over 80% of market share. I think you guys know which airlines those are. But we could have a situation like that here. And so the pilots have their main group, the Airline Pilots Association. And what they do is they get together. Now that is a union, because those folks are still employees of those airlines. On the other hand, that could work. It is a possibility that could work. But again, like I said, a lot of ER docs like being independent contractors, so that wouldn't work. So then what we'd have to do is think about, in every state, have a group that is set up, and that group is its own entity. And that group then, the hard part about it is that it'd have to be about organizing emergency physicians and getting every last one of them into that group and saying, look, you will only contract with this group, and this group will make sure that you will then go out and establish contracts and get you work where you want to get. That happens with a lot of organizing. And so I have a lot of experience with political organizing. I don't have as much experience with labor organizing. And that's where the challenge of this will come in, and the experience will be valuable. So that I would like to really hear from Don and Joe about this concept and the idea of what might be actual viable ways forward, because I really do want to see that happen. I do appreciate all the discussion about, resolutions, ASAP and all this, but ultimately we do have to start thinking about a real solution that can be executed to stave off what is the inevitable future at this, what looks like the inevitable future right now.
Amish, so the SAG-AFTRA, it's a Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Radio and Television Artists. So, it's a guild, it's a union, right? And all these members of SAG-AFTRA around the country, there's these master agreements. So, and the union or SAG-AFTRA would negotiate with industries, right? What the studios in Hollywood or the networks, and there's a master agreement that practically every studio, every producer, every network, major network signs on to. And in these agreements with these companies, with these industries, they have what's called a security clause. So these companies agree that, by the way, if we're going to do a movie or we're going to do a show, or we're going to do this, we're going to hire a union member, a member of SAG-AFTRA. So that's how it works. And that actor, that personality, that talent. You're right. They're an independent contractor per se. The SAG-AFTRA contract with the signatory industries, they pay, they pay the worker, but they also contribute to the SAG-AFTRA fund for their health and welfare and retirement funds, right? So, but you're absolutely right. So the union, SAG-AFTRA negotiates the bare minimum or the minimums, right? And then depending on the actor, they could make much more, right? I mean, here in Chicago, the SAG-AFTRA contract at the minimum at the network stations here, it's like minimum pay is $100,000. But naturally, depending on how much they want that talent, it could be anywhere from 200, 300, 500, $1 million. So that's how it works. But the union negotiates with these companies, with these shops and these industries, and they become signatories to the union contract. And the workers, because of the security clause, they have to be a member of the union or the SAG-AFTRA in order to work at these businesses, at these companies. And you're right, and it's sort of like a journeyman. Mm-hmm.
Could this translate to our profession, and what are the consequences? What are the obstacles, and what are the opportunities?
Well, just having the solidarity to keep everybody together, right? That's one of the things. Because one of the things, Hollywood back in the day when all our film production was in Southern California, and the labor movement was so strong there, they pretty much said, like, you're not going to get these actors, you're not going to get these writers, you're not going to get these producers unless you sign the agreement, unless you agree that from this day forward, I'm talking 1920s, 1930s, from this day forward, you're going to have you're going to agree that whoever you hire for these jobs are going to be union members. So, and back then we had strong solidarity. You're taking the 1930s, 1940s, when you had 35% of workers in the country were members of a union. So you had this great solidarity that was able to establish this agreement. Can you do it today? I mean, what kind of solidarity? Because remember, now you've got this group that's going to negotiate with, like, think of the hospital networks, right? Any of these positions, here in town, Aurora, right, is the big hospital network here in Chicago. And if you were to organize, you're going to say, Advocate Aurora, only doctors and ER doctors you could hire are when you're members of ER Doctors Union or ER Doctors Guild. And by the way, here is their base minimums. Here is, you're going to contribute to their health and welfare funds. This is what they get. These are their hours. These are, their days off. They get, how many weeks of vacation, right? So, and then that's how it would work. And just pretty much to organize, to build toward that is it's that power dynamics, right? I mean, how powerful in building that solidarity.
That's I think the benefit of a group like this. I mean, that's I think was the, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is what Dr. Lee wanted to kind of get started, a nidus.
Absolutely. Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is the benefit. I mean, we just celebrated Labor Day a couple of weeks ago, and it was, it started in Chicago because a bunch of workers who they wanted to build their power. They said, you know what, we're putting our tools down. We're walking off the job. Well, I mean, as a doctor, I mean, if all the if you organize and say you do a walkout at all the hospitals in town, like, we're not going to, we're going to leave the ER until we get a contract. Right.
Well, we're I think many of us would find it unethical or uncomfortable in order to walk off the job. However,
yeah,
if you were to plan for something far out into the future and say, look, there's a 2-year, whatever grace period, but as soon as January 1st of 2024 comes around, that's it. It's contract or nothing. That's one way that would give them plenty of time to arrange and organize their own, whatever they're what they need as far as their staffing is concerned. So we're not walking off the job if there's a lot of lead to look, all of us are organizing and negotiating contracts in a very different way. I mean, we should be allowed to pursue gainful employment as we see fit, including organize under the National Labor Relations Act. That is part of the law. So is it tricky? Yes, but that's, I think, what we need to do. And I think what people on this call have to realize is that when you do, and these guys know this because they've been doing this for a while, the hardest part about all of it is that you have to get all the other ER docs on board. I think that what's the motivation here, the sell, the pitch, is simply that we're facing a horrible future 5 years from now, according to the report. So that's a threat. I don't know of very many ER docs who are happy. And so that should serve as the sort of the motivation to get us there. When in my one-on-one conversations with a lot of my colleagues, they all feel the same way. I said, what can we do? And here's the other thing, like SAG-AFTRA, way back when I was thinking about joining, I think the fee was like $500 or $600. This was way back when. I don't know what it is now, but there is a fee, an upfront fee that you have to pay. Well, even if you charged physicians $1,000 to join the guild, right? To cover expenses and all that, and it was a $1,000 a year fee, once a year annually. You would make that back if we were to arrange for $1 extra to come in per hour. $1 per hour raise negotiated gets you back all that money, and all that would be necessary for us to have what we need: a lawyer, a ER doc who is senior, who is able to discipline other ER doctors who aren't performing, admin staff, etc. Right, and an office. So that's kind of how I thought to myself, well, this actually could be done. But the biggest challenge is convincing a solid majority of your colleagues to get on board. That is really the work that is at hand.
Well, I need to jump in. There's other challenges. I think the idea of that solidarity is the biggest challenge just in general. Anytime you want to get a majority of anybody doing anything is the hardest of things. But when you're talking about a guild structure like this, that would actually be against current federal law. So, there's a couple things here. So you have the National Labor Relations Act, and you have 50 different public sector laws that mirror the National Labor Relations Act, but those are all different, all different. But the federal law, the acute care ruling of healthcare, has broken physicians into one of 8 units. But part of that ruling that allowed physicians to even unionize to begin with was they did not want to have to deal with physicians in the ED, physicians, in the OBGYN, trauma surgery, and then the same thing with the RNs. You didn't want to have 20 different unions that the hospitals had to negotiate with. So there is already well-established federal law around that structure. So this guild structure not only would you have to bring a majority of people together and get them buy in on that, have the infrastructure to organize behind the scenes. And I can tell you, as something that is what I do, that is a task that I can't even really imagine what that would mean. Like that is, I don't know how many staff members I would have to do that. But then you're having this public sector group in it. So I mean, like you're having to rewrite federal law. And, you know, that's a challenge at any given point when you're talking about the National Labor Relations Act. You're going to have to change those public sector laws that, again, tend to mirror the National Labor Relations Act. And then you're going to have to be looking at racketeering potentially. You know, like what happens if physicians are coming in, if every single ED physician came in and said, well, we're not going to work tomorrow because of unless we get paid this much money. Then again, you're running into some more political and legal barriers. So, you know,
I mean,
go ahead.
Nobody's suggesting doing anything illegal.
Of course, yeah.
No. But the idea is that this would be done under existing law legally. That was the whole idea. But if you're saying that's not currently legal, then that's a different obstacle.
So the acute care ruling, when it breaks down the appropriate units within healthcare, it's talking about a geographic building first and foremost, and then the 8 different divisions. But the last part of it says, or a different unit deemed appropriate by the union. So there is leeway within that law. But when you're talking about physicians, you know, working at the biggest healthcare system, and then physicians potentially working at a small community hospital, they still have EDs, and the unions coming in and trying to set wages. That is not an appropriate unit under the National Labor Relations Act, that anything that would currently go forward under federal law. And again, there are 2 attorneys on here. If someone has a different opinion on that, but like that is, it would take we would have to have a majority of Democrats in the House and the Senate, and then being willing to actually redefine appropriate healthcare units specifically under the National Labor Relations Act. And we can't even get, you know, minimal changes to the act made. So that is a task. I don't want to say it's impossible. And, you know, one of the things that's great about unions is it comes down to the power is actually in the workers, and whether or not something is legal doesn't mean you can make change. You know, this picture in my background is Washington State, and it's where I'm from. It's illegal for teachers to go on strike. And 3 years ago, almost every single teacher in the entire state said, you know what, we're going to go on strike because we're tired of the way we're being treated. So, you know, just because it's written down somewhere by some committee or something that they can't do something, or this isn't the way it's done, doesn't mean that it's not something that we could do and achieve. But in the current political environment under current law, trying to do that wouldn't be possible.
I think I saw the thing from Megan in the chat, and I'm also I think I have the same kind of questions as she does. Is that I guess what you're saying is that in sum the law with regard to doctors and hospitals, that this would be difficult. Changing the law is very difficult, and we know that's a whole nother story. I'm not sure that's the direction anybody wanted to go, unless I'm wrong. That's also really, really hard. The idea was to do something that was currently supported in law. And I think what I'm hearing is that that's also extremely tricky and challenging.
So
sorry.
Jump in here for a minute, because I think this is why we wanted to have that meeting first, so we can have this discussion. And I think we need to continue on with this. But what I want to gather from Joe and Don sitting at the table right here to kind of wrap up the unionization discussion, and then we'll broaden this a little bit. And I want to go to Terry Mulligan about sort of the overall approach and where unionization might fit in. And I think we have to have, I'm hoping now we have people in the same room, we can have this get down to nitty gritty business, which gets a little bit wonky, which is why Megan's confused like I am. But
can I jump in here for a second? So, you know, the statement that emergency physicians like being independent contractors, the historical context is that the greatest political victory that ASAP claimed initially was to get independent contractor status for emergency physicians. You go back into the 80s, they fought, they spent a lot of money, they lobbied for this, but anybody who thinks about it, we are not independent contractors. Okay, we're told how to work, when to work. We have to give 90 days notice before we can leave a team health job. So we are not. Now, I know all the things with, you know, setting aside money and all this, but this was done by ASAP to set up, you know, I don't have to pay taxes on their behalf. they're going to be thinking I'm making a shitload of money because I'm not giving them any benefits. The rank and file were hoodwinked early on with this independent contractor status. So we have all these difficulties we're running into here, and it'll piss people off and it'll be a sea change. But, you know, everybody's pissed right now with their independent contractor status. Well, you guys are really employees. Okay, I don't know what's going to happen in California. Okay, because California, we're not independent contractors with the new stuff they passed. So maybe, you know, we convince a bunch of team health doctors, fight for employee status, then we unionize you and we eliminate this question here. Just say, we want you guys, look, state of Florida, you're all screwed anyway because of the corporate practice law. You're working for team health down there, petition to be employees, then we unionize you and we fight for you.
IC status works for, you know, there's some tax benefits, right? That's partly why people like being an IC. But it's just like the World Federation, the Wrestling Federation, whatever they're called now, right? Like they have a monopoly. There's no other WWE, right? There's no other wrestling place to go. So you're not really an independent contractor anymore. I think that's analogous to the situation. How I want to wrap up the union discussion right now is just ask, it's pretty simple terms to Don Villar and Joe Crane is, because you've said it before, we can unionize, right? Do we have to work out this IC issue much more? Is that something we should just have a separate meeting about to get down and dirty about exactly that? But the bottom line is we can unionize. Like you can go talk to Joe Crane after the meeting and start, my understanding.
Actually, you know, Joe, I mean, and folks, I mean, we did organize a 1099 group before, and then later after they were organized, they forced the employer to make them W-2 employees. So it is possible. Because I mean, think about it. At the end of the day, you guys you have the power through solidarity to change that. Well, you could change it in law, but you could also force the employer, you know, through your solidarity, like, hey, stop treating us like 1099 employees, treat us like W-2 employees, and give us all the benefits and everything that it demands. So, I mean, because that's what there was a bargaining here in Chicago that we organized. It was they were all 1099 employees, and so we convinced the employer, like, hey, you know, recognize them as a union, and it took a while to make her realize, like, stop 1099 your employees. So.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just going to say, you definitely, there's always an avenue to doing something, you know, no matter what, like Don was saying. But I don't want everyone to give a blanket statement that every single person needs to unionize, because I may be talking to some people right now who are medical director in their title, and maybe it's just, you know, they're outside of it, or they have a different actual contract than, you know, some of the other people. But in general, yes, you know, people can unionize. People can call me up and we can start having that conversation. And then the bigger point that I was going to make really quickly about, like, ED people coming together and forming a union. So if, like, Team Health and Sound Physician, some of these other groups, if people started organizing in mass, one of the things you can do is have individual contracts and then have, like, a regional contract, kind of like what the Kaiser system does. Whereas every single location of Kaiser has its own contract for the nurses and everything, but then they get together and they negotiate a national agreement or a regional agreement. So, like, you would still have the ability to come together and force significant change upon an area. And that is one of the things we're actually trying to do. But, you know, my approach to this is slightly different. This, you know, seems like people are trying to, like, you know, jump all the way and fix everything, which is admirable. But, like, for me, I need to build power where we can have it. We can get a collective bargaining agreement where you have just cause protection. You don't have to worry about your boss retaliating against you, because you're going to have a union there having your back. And then starting to organize more groups within that system, and then start organizing within that state, and then start organizing across the country. So, like, you know, we can get to these things. I could have a master Providence contract. Every single physician in Providence is under a national agreement, but the physicians in New York might be getting, not that I don't think New York has Providence. Please bear with my West Coast healthcare organizations. But, you know, like, they might be getting paid more because it's New York, and then now in Idaho, it's a little bit cheaper. So again, you would have a master agreement with individual ability to still be like, this is what works for us. And that is one of the greatest things about having a union is this is a democracy and it is extremely flexible and we can get extremely creative just depending on how invested people are in the process.
All right, thanks, Joe. I think that really helps give us a 30,000-foot view. And I think, I mean, this is supposed to spur concrete next steps. And I think we're getting there because now that everybody's been introduced, we can have a meeting. We don't want death by meetings, but we need one more. And, we can bring in Brad Dreifuss, which I don't think not Brad Dreifuss, Brad Schwartz, who is an attorney and a patient advocate, been a litigation attorney. We have some spouses of emergency physicians who are attorneys and looking to get involved here. So I think if we can get a meeting of the minds on this subject, I think we'll be going places really fast. And Dr. Moreno as well with AEM. So to back out a little bit, let's have Dr. Mulligan. I know. Do you have a quick comment, Brad? Because I want to swing to Terry Mulligan. He's had his hand up for a while, and also I know he has something that is born on a piece of napkin that we met at the past AAM conference. So it's always, there it is. So a napkin, that's always where the best ideas come from. I know that's going to take a few minutes. So if you have a quick comment, Brad, that we can move to Dr. Mulligan.
It's more of an introductory comment, and then I'll back out of the way and Terry take over. And it's really based on this piece Chad just put into the chat to everyone. And it's the fact that we need to do some listening first across the different stakeholder groups to understand what do the physicians want and need. We think we know, but if we're talking across specialties, and that's where the real power of taking medicine back comes from, even if emergency medicine is the tip of the spear, that's important. The patient piece is equally important because we're going to need the patients who are voters to come speak up on our behalf. Because if we're consistently seen, and we have been and we will continue to be until we change the narrative, of us being seen as the rich doctors, because we've been pit that way, we can't ignore that, which is why it's one of the most important ways that we behave will be with humility and working hand in hand with our patients and the patient advocacy groups. So we can understand those perspectives. We think we understand the suits and the administrators, and we do in large part, but we don't have the economists here at this table. We don't have all the health lawyers here. We have the malpractice lawyers, the folks who focus on us. And so I'll get to the kind of strategy in just a bit on how maybe we can address that. But if we get lost in the weeds, we will be divided and conquered within a moment's notice, because the whole systems were set up for that. It's been designed over 30, 40, 50 years for us to be slain quickly and our voices drowned out based on our Achilles heel. And I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Brad. I think one thing we have to do very carefully is define stakeholders, because when ASAP starts talking about, and I say this specifically, they start talking about stakeholders, they're talking about private equity. So no, we're not aligning with them, right? But if we define our stakeholders as patients, and that's all of society, and people who have that integrity and authenticity, now we're talking, right? That's where the patient advocacy groups come in. I was hoping Mo Kasich from the economist perspective could actually still be here. And it looks like we don't have Americans for Financial Reform, but we've engaged the stakeholders. So I'm excited about that we can continue that and broaden that tent. And I'll, and Dr. Lawhorn, let's have Terry introduce this subject. And then I'm pretty sure one of the pedals is going to be something that is specific to this. And I think we should discuss the role of AAMTG, or it doesn't have to be AAMTG, because at this point, you don't technically represent it, neither do I. Dr. Ryder, Dr. Moreno are not here to make those decisions, but roles that it could play in taking back medicine, especially in emergency medicine. But let's have Dr. Mulligan save we actually put coffee stain. Do you have the original?
There it is, yeah.
Yeah, we put coffee stain on it just to make it look more authentic. Is it the AEM?
I think it was partly there. Well, this was one of those meetings. It was over breakfast at the end of a long conference. It was at the end of the AEM conference, which we had in person in this little window of COVID relative safety in May in St. Louis. And it was a very well attended conference. We talked about a lot of these issues there. And it was one of those meetings where we're trying to wrap everything all up. And I think, all of these different suggestions and avenues of approach and attack and strategy, they all seem to get mixed up and jumbled together. And, what are the big priorities and how do we do this? And what I thought was that we needed some sort of a campaign manager. We need somebody who knows that this is actually, this approach, this problem needs 3 or 4 different, 5 different disciplinary approaches, areas that we need to focus on, some of which we have extreme expertise in, and some of which we have less, and some of which we have very little. So, the details of litigation, et cetera. So if you would just allow me, and this will only take 1 or 2 minutes, it's if you let me share here. I just want to show you what this concept is. And it was basically an approach to looking at this as the way a campaign manager would, looking at this the way let's say we were doing something in collaboration with fields outside of medicine. Is it possible to have this screen sharing or no?
Let me know if you're able to, and if not, I'm going to.
Host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Give this a shot. We lost our
okay.
Whiz.
Oh, here it is. Okay, good.
Left to me.
And again, I'll try to be as brief as I can. Tell me when the screen shows up.
It says there we go. Okay, yes. And Faith Quenzer, right there is
right. So there we are at this breakfast and everyone knows that you can solve all the world's problems in small meetings like this. And this is the notes that we took that seem to kind of wrap everything up. And so the way I kind of imagine this campaign is we have 5 different areas to focus on. And these are somewhat joined in the middle, but they involve different disciplines in different areas. So far we need to focus on public and patient relations, where this would involve engaging mainstream media, social media, public education, public surveying, forming patient groups, and then really focusing on, what patient care, letting them know what the situation is for us. There have been a lot of people in this conference who have expressed surprise, particularly the non-physicians, that this is actually the case. And so I think if we're going off of the current zeitgeist of corporations being at the heart of a lot of problems in our country, particularly the pandemic, and people being upset about how things have been handled, I think plus the good relations and the good light and goodwill that emergency physicians are currently being held in. This is something that I think the time is ripe for this. Another area to focus on, and we've talked a lot about this, is advocacy and legislation and policy. So focusing on our lobbying groups, our approaches with state and national legislation or policy change, approaching FTC or DOJ, approaching CMS. AAM has been approaching and working with all of these groups for the last 15 or 20 years. And also, I think unionization and collective bargaining and the legislative allowances and aspects of that fits in under this as well. Another area is this is one of our real strong points. Not only are we very well trusted by the public, but we are also physicians and scientists. And we have the strength of evidence-based medicine, of peer-reviewed publications, of data, of approaching these things scientifically and ways to find out the right answer. And I still believe that what's right and what's true actually has value and merit, even amongst the public. And so we should focus also on our usual routes of publications and scientific conferences like this one, but also engaged in letters to the editors of peer-reviewed journals and also other lay scientific journals, Nature, Science. and not just in the science and academics of medicine, but also in health economics, health legislation, health policy, public health. I think they're all very good numbers and very good data, scientific medical data that show that what we do in the emergency department is unbelievably impactful in people's health, and also economics, and also public health. And we talked about the avenue of litigation and legal actions. So multiple different avenues of legal actions, the ones we've talked about for a long time: corporate practice of medicine, fee splitting, lay ownership, antitrust, class actions, but also other things to consider, going after hospital groups, CMGs, and whistleblower laws, anti-retaliation laws, fraudulent billing practices, whether this is actually RICO and racketeering on their part, whether it's implicit or explicit, and then going through the National Labor Relations Act, and are we really independent practitioners or not? Do we actually have 1099 status or not? And I think the argument has been made that in many ways we are not. And that leads us to the last, litigation and approach, which we haven't talked as much about here, but it's the concept of social justice and equity. These practices ultimately hurt patients. They are killing patients, and they're killing our patients. And we know our patients tend to be among the lower socioeconomic status. They are people who are uninsured and underinsured. These are people who are overly representative of vulnerable populations, minorities, immigrant status. And these practices not only hurt patients, but they hurt vulnerable patient populations more, and potentially even on purpose. For example, if it's Medicaid and Medicare that are being overbilled intentionally on these practices, and especially with surprise billing, then which patient populations who rely on the ER the most, who are our patients, who are these patient populations that are hurt the worst? And so I think there's an argument to be made that this is a civil rights violation, that these are civil rights and human rights violations, and that we can approach litigation, policy, and PR based on these concepts too. So I think just to say that these are our 4 or 5 areas that we need to focus on, they all have this common base of being putting autonomy back into the doctor-patient relationship, and taking the money and the perverse, inverse, adverse incentives out of the picture. So I'll try to shut this off.
Thank you, Dr. Mulligan. We have one of the strengths here. I mean, we have a lot of strengths, I think, in this, but one of the other strengths is we have you and Brad who love to bring it to that 70,000 foot view, and it's amazing. And then we have people who can get right into the nitty gritty weeds, which I don't really consider weeds. I consider it like, if anyone's looked at Scott Weingart, right? He talks about professionals or experts talk in details, and we have that spectrum here, which is what I really love. I want to, because I know Dr. Lawhorn wanted to jump in here, and I think this is one aspect that we should discuss for just a moment about what AEMPG is and how that can be one arm in that pedal as far as a concrete step that we could take to retake contracts. And then I'll swing it over to Brad, because I'm sure he has some thoughts on where we can go with next steps. And I know that Brad has been looking forward. And I think, we've been focusing on this Take EM Back campaign and working with ACEP. But as we know, we need to continue the fight with an ACEP, but that doesn't have to be what we're preoccupied by. We can go ahead and make some waves and make real change happen, whether or not they're going to come along with it. So David, let me bring you in here. If people missed Dr. Lawhorn, he's a founding member, I think, of AAM overall, past AEMPG president. I'm just saying you're a founding member because you're old, so I assume that you.
No, it's actually true. I sort of was accidentally a founding member from being brought into AAM very, very early, right after Bob and the other fellas started it, and was brought in actually by Andy Walker, who was a longtime, I think, editor of the newsletter for AAEM. But Andy and I have been real friends. So that's how I got involved in AAEM back shortly after Bob started things. So I think I can be fairly brief and hopefully straightforward here. I first want to say appreciate everything that's been discussed today. I'm a fan of all of these avenues. I think they all ought to be pursued. Dr. Amish made Dr. Shah made a great segue into sort of the business aspects away from the legal aspects and talking about a guild. I like that idea too. I've also had that type of concept. And when I came on AAM on the board, one of the things that came up that we brought up, and originally, like I say, I believe it was one of Bob McNamara's original babies from his thought from starting AAM, was to form some sort of national group that physicians, not just a professional organization, but a business organization that people could be a part of. So since I was one of the few who'd been out there working just in the emergency rooms and had experience with starting up from scratch, starting up businesses in emergency medicine and understanding what it took, I was part of this effort and all the dialogue and discussions. And so the concept of an AAM physician group in its most simplistic concept was, okay, why don't we just form a national group that competes directly with the Team Health and the Envision and all of that. I mean, after all, Team Health was started by a guy who started into a 2-year family practice residency and dropped out before he even finished his first year. Coastal Emergency Services was started by an OB/GYN doctor. Why can't we have a national organization that competes successfully directly with these national organizations that's started by emergency medicine doctors, professionals? Why can't we do it? So that was sort of the original concept behind it. We talked for a long time because there are a lot of nuances to developing and establishing a group. We jumped through legal hurdles with AAM. Ultimately, AAM formed a separate, wholly owned subsidiary as a for-profit business called the AAM Physician Group. And Bob McNamara has become its first CEO, Chief Medical Officer, and he can tell you, I'm sure he's had a great learning curve along the way, but he's been doing it pretty much single-handedly. And one of my thoughts all along was to actually form a national group that would compete with these other groups, is more of in my perspective, more of a top-down approach, as opposed to what I would characterize a guild concept from a bottom-up approach. Where a guild, you're basically talking with the emergency physicians directly and convincing them to come on board, and that should happen. But the success of the contract management companies has not come from them convincing ER physicians that they're the best thing since ice cream. No, it's come from them making daily contact and push with every CEO of every hospital system and every individual hospital in the United States. And it's a top-down approach, because ultimately it is the hospital CEOs who make the decision who is working in their ERs. And so for a national emergency medicine physician group to really work, it would have to be a company that took on those similar approaches to make it successful and be not only dealing with physicians on one hand, but also the major focus on hospital CEOs and re-educating the Hospital Association of America and all the hospital CEO systems in America, and convincing them that this sort of group is the viable way to go. It would have to be for profit. Eventually, after being established, those profits, instead of going into the pockets of everybody else, could be funneled back. I envision, I think I mentioned one time to Bob McNamara, almost as a giant co-op. The funds could eventually be funneled back to all of those regional groups, individual groups, national groups that have become a part of the AAM physician group. So again, just one more avenue to think about The AAM physician group is out there. It is an entity right now. It would need a lot of help and a lot of input and money to put it on that level of competition with the AAPs and the APPs and the team health and all of that. But it could be done. And just one more aspect of things. I'll kind of stop there and let you guys sort of mull over that concept. Looks like Mitch vanished from the area.
Well, I can comment, David. I mean,
yeah,
the idea has validity. It's a massive undertaking.
Oh yeah.
Taking him back is relatively new, and this is a massive undertaking. I mean, you're talking. We know the numbers, right? KK&R bought Envision for $9.9 billion. Team Health $6.1 billion. While valid, it is a humongous undertaking. And, the other issue is that, and what we've learned with the AM physician group is that, even physician groups feel threatened, right? Like, whoa, what do you do? This concept would threaten those that you would think would be most aligned. So what you would effectively have to do is go and take back contracts from well-funded industry. And, I think it's a good idea, but I really think for keeping the ball rolling on taking him back, that's something that, can be a back burner issue, but there's just not enough resources that would just really be a huge undertaking in my view. Yeah,
it is a big deal.
I don't know, just to put a little perspective on that, I wish we had Mark Reiter and Arthur Smolenski on right now. Because I think Arthur's like that. Arthur Smolenski is on the board of AEM Physician Group now. I know that had been discussed. I'm sure you were part of that discussion at some point, Dr. Lawhorn. And Lisa Moreno has had some background on that. To me, it sounds like, honestly, it's something that's viable. And when you say it would, Dr. Reiter only has so much bandwidth, right? Right now we're relying on the individual physicians to try to create their own democratic groups, which is an uphill battle sometimes because of, especially not just non-competes, but non-interferences. So starting a group at a place where Team Health has a contract, you might be putting yourself at major risk. And then the current model of AMPG is sort of saying, well, you should take that risk and we'll get your backs. But a lot of us are kind of wusses. So it's not really working that way. So I don't know if it's like the next step. It would be a lot of resources, but at the same time, like you said, a bunch of dropouts did it. So it could be done. We would just need somebody to really drive it intensely and really galvanize it. But that should be part of the discussion. Absolutely. Yeah. I swapped out for Don Villar. Don, if you will have anything to say, I'll swap myself back out as well. I can only feature 9 people currently on this thing, just because of how Zoom works. But we have about 10 minutes left here. So I've got 2 thoughts. One is that there's spatial chat after this, and or the spatial chat still exists. So if you guys, I'll be over there. I'm going to make a cocktail because it'll be almost 5 o'clock my time, Central. And I'm happy to have these conversations. That worked out quite well last night. I think we had a smaller group, but Dr. Lawhorn had a little circle of storytelling around. So I think we can continue these discussions informally if anyone would like. It's pretty cool setup where you move your little avatar around and then you can hear people louder when you get closer to them. So it really kind of emulates something in real life. And I'll turn this over to Dr. Dreifuss now, because he always is great at putting this 30,000 foot view in. And I think we can probably use the momentum here, because I've been very inspired to transition into what needs to be a real strategy meeting and a little bit of a direction. As I mentioned to Brad, I created this organization. I did create the organization, right? This isn't about me, but I created the organization because, well, I saw a need, and because I've seen what can happen to overly democratic organizations like ASAP. If it gets too democratic, then it can become corrupted, because you can take the bylaws and swap them to say let's be unethical. I mean, that's what they did with the original bylaws. They took the let's be ethical part out. And I did not want that to happen to this organization. So I don't know the perfect way to do this. The perfect, what role this organization should play. If it should be the next AMA, I don't really necessarily think that's the case, but I definitely think we can be, we can have some concrete, we can create some concrete steps moving forward. And I'm really hoping this is just that ability to facilitate meaningful conversation and alliances. I mean, that's my view of it. But Brad, please kind of bring us home with some perspectives, and then we'll close this up with some final thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the spatial chat.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone, not just in this panel, but across the entire summit. It's been highly educational, I think, for all of us. I don't know if there's anybody who's walking away not having learned or been motivated by something that they heard. And I think we were already getting the whole audience for this summit, for those who actually attended, are the motivated 5% or frustrated maybe 10%. And I think we have learned so much from folks who have a lot of new ideas or demonstrated ideas and have proven track record, et cetera, that we really need to segment out our different audiences. First and foremost, the audience here, the 188 people who registered, and really get a temperature and see what people learned and understand, what there's an appetite for. Because I agree that there are many areas that we could be working right now, from lawsuits to building guilds / labor unions, to working on the, not just PR, because PR is so superficial, but really working on the patient physician relationship development and advocacy. And we need to figure out how to do that and what structure to work from, and who's going to show up to do the work. Because there are a lot of us who come with ideas, who have fingers in 1,000 different things, and would not be the ones to be able to actually put the majority of the horsepower in to actually getting the stuff done. And so maybe starting with the attendees, and then expanding from there and figuring out, okay, what are people aware of? How do we take the video from each one of these talks and make it available and frame it in a way where people will want to consume it and understand, right? This is all well and good if we got together and come up with some ideas from on high, which is often how it happens. But as soon as we all step away, we're stepping back into our default worlds that are usually crazy with kids and work and everything else. So how do we keep the momentum going? And if emergency medicine is going to be the tip of the spear, we need to be really thoughtful about how we do that in a way that's relatable to the other specialties, which means getting to understand what the other specialties, where they are in their thought process. And so there's almost like multiple tiers. And we need to figure out a structure in which to do that. So there are going to be a whole nother set of meetings. I said I would not start necessarily another organization again. But I feel like there is the horsepower coming from this meeting, and the integrity of the people who have participated in this meeting is at such a high level that we do have the fodder to move forward. The easiest thing for us to do, I'm sure, would just be like, okay, we're gonna go for a lawsuit. We're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. But the overall picture hasn't been painted well enough, or it's not been communicated well enough and marketed well enough for most of the people that we need to be on board, to be at the table, and to feel like they have a voice and it's not being foisted upon them. Because there are schemes and groups and all sorts of stuff right and left that are always billing what they're doing as the ways forward. And so there's a lot of inborn skepticism. People are suffering huge moral injury and burnout. And so, yeah, there needs to be a strategy group that comes together that is transdisciplinary by nature and really thinking about what are the different audiences, how do we want to engage them, and listen, fundamentally listen. We think we are coming with a lot of the answers, but just like in business, we need to test our assumptions. We need to play with our models and really have us find a way to walk with humility, because we're looking to solve a major pain point, or many major pain points in different parts of this whole, I think of like, as far as a factory, right? From the raw materials at the beginning of the factory to a car that's coming out at the end. And many of us serve and have lenses from different places in that manufacturing line or that organizational structure. In order to do this well, we need to not have it be hierarchical, but be more of a creative process. And I don't know if any of us have all the answers on how to do it, but we have to start somewhere and be willing to adapt what we're doing to be effective. And I really appreciate Terry's flower and the way you speak of metaphors, because I think that's one of the easiest ways to relate. And so, yeah, taking that and moving it forward and building structure around it is important. What the name of the organization is less important to me than the governance and the structure and what is agreed upon as the mission and vision, and then the guiding principles. Then how are we going to implement the guiding principles from the very level of the organizing people who are on board? It's like companies talking about ESG, right? Or talking about what their social missions are. Most of it comes out of the marketing department. We cannot do that. It has to be inborn in the DNA of what we're doing. And part of me really likes the idea of having it as part of AAEM, but that's not necessarily an organization that other specialties relate to. Or we get into the old school politics, which shouldn't be there. So Take Medicine Back might be a way to do it, but it's currently maybe not structured to have that kind of transparency or the ability. It has the ability to have the expedience and move forward, which is kind of really the smart part of the way Mitch put it together. But it doesn't mean you'll get necessarily the buy-in, especially because some of us, myself included, end up being somewhat polarizing figures because we're willing to speak out and even just stick our head up just to say, hey, I want to learn more and work in groups where I'm maybe the most junior person in the room because I'm learning tons and I'm integrating it into what we're doing. So I don't mean to get too magnanimous about this, but I'm speaking as much to our audience who's here and listening as I am to the people on this panel, that we need to figure out a really thoughtful approach, because there are a lot of big personalities that need managed, myself included, right? There are a lot of organizations that already have 50, 100,000 people involved, right? Who this may or may not fit into what they're doing. So I don't know that an existing structure would work, but figuring out what is the process for building a coalition that is transparent and then can take all of these things that we want to do and be able to prioritize them and stage them effectively and have agreement within those groups of stakeholders, right? Because many of us have connections in our legislatures, whether it be the national, whether it be Senate or whether it be at our state levels. And we're going to have to work at local levels, state levels, and national levels, all simultaneously. So if you're having the bottom up meet the top down in the middle, I've found that's the best approach for sustainability, but it's often the most difficult to articulate. And it takes a lot of horsepower to run it. And I will leave it there because there are people much wiser than me in this group, and I want to leave it open for questions.
Thank you, Brad. I mean, we have a few minutes for closing thoughts or questions from the panel. Just a few. I mean, we can stay on, but I want to end this on time and then move it over to the Kiko chat, spatial chat, so we can absolutely continue this. And I'm just gonna, in a moment, give some closing thoughts about next steps and some thanking some people who haven't been able to show themselves here. So, Joe, did you have any thoughts? I saw you.
Yeah, no, I just didn't want to jump in. So, you know, I've been doing this union thing for a long time, and I'm the expert on organizing physicians, whatever that actually means, you know. But at the end of the day, whatever you all do, whatever you all decide to do, you have to be organized. And I don't mean that as organized with a union, but you have to build a foundation. You have to get together. You have to make sure that you've laid that foundation right, and that you know a direction that you're trying to move, and understand that you are going to get resistance along the way. You're going to fight very powerful political opponents, You're going to fight companies that will do everything they can to terrify you. But the only way you're going to win this, the only way is the way that everything, the only way this country was founded, the only way that anyone has ever stood up and taken power back is by getting organized. So just, whatever you do, support each other and realize that, and I know this is emergency medicine back, but remember that you are physicians, and there are RNs, and there are techs, and there are Teamsters who are driving the supplies in. There's everyone there. So get organized and stand together and take your damn profession back. And I need you all to do this, because my kids are patients. Don't take offense. I don't care about you all. I want you all to be able to take care of my kids. I need you all to be able to take care of us in the next damn pandemic. So please get organized, come together, stop being afraid of having a voice. Realize you have the most powerful voice in labor. You are 20% of our economy. Realize the power you have, come together and say enough is enough, and let's go change the damn world. That's all I got.
I'll take that. Thank you, Joe.
Here.
I'm happy. We'll close this off in 10 minutes and move it over. But I want anybody who has any closing thoughts to really get to speak out. And the only thing what I want to do is thank all the people who haven't been able to show their face. Dr. Shah, do you have any thoughts before you go, or we can certainly reconnect later?
No, just want to say thank you. Appreciate. I liked all the comments here. I am just really thankful to you for putting the entire thing together. It's not easy to put together something like this, and like I said, let's continue to have productive conversations and continue to try to move this forward in a clear way toward a solution that solves the problems. We've identified some of the problems. We've identified some of the solutions. Like I just heard from Mr. Crane and others, every one of these things will have challenges, and every one of these things is not perfect, as you see, even my own ideas, et cetera. But you have to continue to work on these things until we can really form a clear strategy and move forward. And this is just the starting point. So let's all just digest, say we got together, we had a starting point, and now we're going to try to come up with something actionable with a few of us. So thank you again.
Thanks, Dr. Shah. Really appreciate it. Let me add in. We have Dr. Barish and Dr. Newman looking to speak, and let me add Dr. Newman in here for a moment here as a spotlight. Go ahead, Dr. Newman.
Oh, me or?
I think you mentioned you would like to comment.
Yeah, I think that we're going to have to wrap our heads around the fact that there are going to be some sacrifices we make. There's going to be repercussions. You can't do that. You can't make a large movement without that, and our biggest limiting step has been our fear of speaking out or taking a stance because we don't work, and or we're afraid of not working or losing our job or losing our comfort level of where we're located, and we have to travel. And that's going to happen with some people. We have to wrap our minds around that. We can find jobs. It's not that they don't have options, it's that the options that they have, they don't like. And I'm saying that's not good enough to refuse to advocate and try to get our profession back, that you're going to have to make some sacrifices that are not pleasant. And the analogy I like to use is when the civil rights movement started with the Montgomery bus boycott. And then you had Cesar Chavez's movement in California with the migrant farm workers. Now, these were people who had everything to lose, and they were the bottom of the totem pole. Migrant farm workers didn't even speak English. And if these people could unify and make such significant change that they managed to change federal laws or create a union and get rights as migrant farm workers, then you mean to tell me that physicians with all of our assets have no ability to make the same change when we have less to lose? They had nothing. So they were going to lose more. when they didn't work. They had everything to lose and they still did it. So we don't have an excuse. And on a last note, I do support the whole autonomy thing. It's something I started in 2009 when I became an independent contractor. And I just have to say that if you're, we're in this whorehouse of medicine, my analogy with that. So if you're going to be a hoe, be your own hoe and be your own pimp. End of story.
Dr. Newman, I wish we could just end the conversation, the whole conference right there. But I am obligated to.
Get the point.
I feel like it's going to say something much more appropriate and disappointing.
Can I just say something? Prior to working with physicians, my interaction with physicians when I was sick, the last 2 days, I have heard, the whore and the pimp conversation. I've heard mafia talk. And, these are two things as a union organizer, I have strived to avoid talking with physicians. And then you all just sit here, start talking about the mob and prostitution and crime. And I'm like, why am I being professional here? Come on, what's happening? So anyways, thank you all for the lively conversations and the lively debates and all that good stuff. So
thanks, Joe. And Wendy Dean would say that being professional or a profession is not what you think it is. It's, Dr. Newman is a professional. It doesn't mean not putting on a perfect suit or something and not swearing. So Dr. Barish, let's have you jump in here. I know you've done a lot of work.
Hi, Mitch. Thanks. I've intermittently listened to the meeting. It's been an incredible 2 days. Just a few observations as somebody who's been involved in some of these things for about 20 years, starting with fighting for the union at Boston City Hospital 25 years ago. And in fact, the first time that the NLRB actually ruled in favor of physicians. And it's worthwhile going back to that decision in 2001 or 2, because that was the first time that physicians in training were not seen as students, were actually seen as workers. It was a transformative event led by physicians, for not just physicians, but by physicians. My first point has to do with patient organizations. They're not really here. They need to be here. The last 10 years has seen an incredible upsurge in patient organizations fighting for patients because they've seen the system and physicians not advocating for them enough the way they see value. And so we need to have them here. And I'm glad to facilitate that conversation, Mitch. I work with several of them. Most of them have started because of harmful events. That's how they came together. But others are chronic illness, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, et cetera. They have a lot to say about this, and I'm sure they would offer a lot of credibility to our message. Number two, and I know Terry alluded to that. I wasn't there, Terry, but there's a lot of lessons internationally to learn about these issues that we've talked about. It's not a surprise that for the last 10 years, the US continues to rank at the bottom of Western liberal democracies as it relates to their healthcare outcomes. And that's not to say that everything there is good, but there's many lessons that have been alluded to in the last 2 days that we can learn from. Physicians in Australia make more money than the US, they have more private practice, and they have much more power than they do in the US. For example, no time to talk about it now, but there's a lot of lessons about how they've mobilized as a community to work together. And that ties into my third message. There has to be multiple specialties on this movement. I can just tell you in anesthesia has dramatically been impacted in the last 3 years due to the same forces that have been knocking emergency medicine down. And that's really particularly, actually, maybe in the last 2 years, it's gone up like at least threefold. That is massive groups that have been just sucking up all the independent groups as well as the academic groups. It's quite an extraordinary change in the last 2 years. And finally, we've alluded to indirectly to safety and quality, but we've not shown enough data. We need data to make our case. It could be case studies, it could be stories, it needs to be cohort studies, maybe even more than that. But the only way that we can truly get a lot of the bigger political forces is to have harder data. And so I'd like to see more data supporting the positions that many have raised here in order to facilitate our discussion. I think there's quite a few people in the academic sphere that could help here, both in providing methodologies to use some of the data sources that you have and turn them into actionable data that would be useful on a political level. So thank you for inviting me to participate in some of this, Mitch, and tremendous work in pulling this together.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, and I want to, well, this is sort of the closing right here. So let's put this all in context. And Paul, I know we've been trying to connect and probably should grab that beer soon in real life because you are in Chicago. You know, what I would say, I'm not sure if you made it to the first day or if you were present for the first day. That was the all-inclusive day where we had, you know, Greater National Advocates speak. And one thing I want to put out there is that I met half of these contacts through the Chicago Participatory Medicine group. And you may not see it, but this part of what I want to thank right now is one of our chief operating officer is actually a patient advocate and self-described radical who is a chief information officer, a retired chief information officer of the hospital. So we've got the data person, or at least one very dedicated data person who's looking to rock and roll, and he has graciously, I suppose I should spot myself here so you can actually see, or pin myself. I would say that he's been doing some amazing things and graciously put aside some of the greater picture so that we could focus on our specific campaign and the summit. But the Chicago or the Society for Participatory Medicine is sort of a national patient group. Paul, I'm not sure if you actually know them. I think they're primarily in Boston. And we have a local chapter that was started by a patient advocate here, Jerry, who was present yesterday, who introduced me to a ton of these people. We wouldn't have these alliances without having a discussion. So I think they need to be fostered. I think you're absolutely right. We need to, this is that big tent, or at least fostering of an alliance to show that we are really working with patients and we are entirely on the same side. In the same token, with our chief information officer, we also have some academics. We have the beginnings of a forensics group, which is what we were trying to, I think that's the data section that you're talking about. But data, as you mentioned, doesn't have to necessarily be an RCT. Data can be case studies and case series or cases that are brought to the media. So I appreciate the insight there, and I'd love to see you in what I think we need to have coming up next would be some real strategy meetings, and probably ones that would take a couple hours, something similar to this, but like, let's bring this to the next step. And I'd love to see a couple other faces that had to work ER shifts right now that have been invaluable in this. And I'll take the last little section here just to thank all of the presenters and recognize that nobody here does really have an agenda. I mean, everybody who's been here in participating is doing this for the right reasons, which has been incredibly inspiring to me. And there are a number of people who I'm afraid to recognize because they're working entirely behind the scenes and may be worried about retaliation. I think Faith Quenzer now has, you know, she's taken on the role of our executive director. And so I think that's public enough that I can publicly thank her here. Faith has been incredible and has been the driving force behind getting this summit to come together, along with our COO, Ivan Handler. And we have a number of, we'll refer to her as Diana, our Wonder Woman, is a recently graduated physician who is worried about the rest of her career and has put so much like endless work into this over the past several weeks and months to make this logistically happen. And then we have Asia Richardson, I'll name her, and a nurse from my practice, Riza Lagas, who have done a ton of work for coordinating, because I'm pretty good at like having conversations, but then the logistics of connecting and herding cats is not where I excel. So we have that. I'm incredibly inspired by this group coming together, and that we can take real concrete steps in what I think probably hasn't been done before in this country. I don't think we've really facilitated these conversations, and this is just the beginning of that. And I see my role really as, maybe as Brad sees it, as a catalyst. I see some curation. I see facilitating the conversation amongst people who are smarter than myself and have more skill sets than myself. My skill set might be in just bringing some people together to have those conversations, and hopefully some visions in this. So with that, I thank you guys all for being here. I'm extremely excited. I should let you know logistically that we have a meeting on Wednesday has been our normal weekly meeting. We've almost had a little bit of a death by meeting. Chad, I don't know if you're supposed to be known as a pseudonym, but I think you're public enough that I can thank you as well for being our editor and really bringing together the blog, because we can raise, I think, more than just physician voices up, right? Patient voices, anybody's been harmed by the system. And even when they're afraid of being, afraid of retaliation, we can raise those voices up, and a la Dr. James Keeney and the Phoenix Award. So logistically, we have meetings on Wednesdays. We're going to have one more meeting this week that we're going to try to keep to very short, for us, 1 hour, as more of a debrief, and not put a lot of weight in ourselves to fix medicine on the next meeting. But I think we can probably discuss some next steps there. So if anyone wants to join that, please email info@takemedicineback.org. That way our Ada Richardson, our executive assistant, can help coordinate that. We can get you guys into a meeting discussion, and we can get things rolling from there. I'm going to head over to the spatial chat in about 5 minutes. So thank you so much for joining.